Enjoy.
Hi everyone, I am Kripa from Kathmandu, Nepal. I almost did not submit this talk. For a long time, I thought that contribution was something you did after you knew enough. Turns out for me, it happened the other way around. These days, I spend most of my time around open source communities working on documentation, advocacy, and organizing events. But the interesting part isn't any of those titles. It's that this whole journey kind of started because I won a sticker. And no, that's not a metaphor. Uh, I still remember giggling over this random GNU head sticker that I had won at NOSC info session in college. They had this orientation by Nepal Open Source Club, and I thought it looked cool, and that was about the extent of my relationship with Linux. Then 2 days later, I skipped a class to watch a senior install Fedora on my very uncool Celeron laptop. So what caught the attention of mine was not Fedora itself, it was how they installed the software. So was so used to with downloading installers and watching the progress bar kind of crawl across the screen, and we click next a couple different times and we waited for things to get extracted, and here they were just typing a few different commands and maybe confirming a prompt once in a while, but that was it. And whatever package they wanted, whatever dependency they needed to install, whatever version they wanted, they did not have to go around different bunch of websites and click a different things and like go to different pages of the websites. And I did not have any idea around what those commands were, but I just knew that I wanted to understand what those commands were. So I decided to try it myself. The first distribution that I actually installed on my own was Ubuntu, mostly because everyone kept telling that it was beginner friendly, which to be fair, it was. Maybe I was the difficult part because I kept on encountering these different bunch of issues. A lot, like there are actual photos from what I encountered. On one attempt, the installer failed while setting up the bootloader, basically the part that lets the computer start the operating system. And on another, I was staring at the pages or like getting lost at the pages of the system logs that looked really important, like they had this piece of information, but it was very unreadable to me at the time. But I just had this habit of taking screenshots of every screen that I came across. Like I did not want the moving information to get lost, and I even sometimes whipped out my phone and just tilted photos of here and there of what it showed on the screen, so that later on when I had to ask to a senior or like any other person to get help, I could refer to those screenshots. I did not know what was supposed to be done next, and I had spent a lot of time through YouTube videos, and I used to hit these limits on ChatGPT, the free version of ChatGPT that I used to use, and I copied commands from different websites and different forums, and it was just because of the trust that someone with a remotely similar issue of a different hardware entirely maybe said that it worked. And I started asking for help on Discord communities and the GNOME community that we have here in Nepal, the Ubuntu Nepal community, and the community leads that they operate these communities with. They are very supportive, and they would respond with messages or like replies like try this command, or like can you run this and send the output, or like send me the certain portion of the terminal what it shows, and then run the command and then show me again. And I was basically borrowing other people's experiences until I could navigate my own. And later, those screenshots could be usable in blog posts. And I started writing down what I had tried and what failed and what finally worked. And I realized that even while I was still learning, I was already creating something useful for somebody who would come to this phase after I would have gone past that phase. And that is how basically everything works in here. At the same time, I also started discovering that open source was not just something happening online. There were actual people and communities around me. And the first major conference experiences for me was Genome Asia Summit 2023, which happened in Kathmandu. And I had went there alone on the third day from my class. I was in college still, and what I took away from that experience was that curiosity itself was valued. Like I didn't have to have already known or like have this advanced knowledge on how things or particular things work. And turns out that someone from my own college, from a different department, was the only Nepali speaker that year. And some of my seniors were also part of the organizing committee, is what I discovered later. So I didn't have to stay with them all the time, like throughout all the tracks, but asking questions and listening and being interested was enough to be a part of the of the conversations that were happening in there. Like I remember this session where there was this orientation of Krita, which I understood as an alternative to Adobe. And I realized this gap between someone who contributes and someone who is still learning, which much smaller than I had imagined. So someone answered my beginner questions without making me feel out of place. And recently I found myself trying to create that same feeling for someone else. Like because if whether it's if it's a bug report or like a blog post or like a small npm package, people are more likely to contribute or like keep contributing when someone notices. And one thing I've carried from open source into my work is that recognition matters, and nothing is too small or too less valuable on those sorts. So a colleague where I work with kind of built an npm package for handling the Nepali calendar. It was handy to apply to all the date pickers across the system that we had, and nobody had really stopped to acknowledge that someone from the team had built it and shared this. Like they used it, but like they didn't acknowledge it enough, and so I suggested that we celebrate it internally, but not because it was a huge project, but because someone had seen a problem and they had solved it, and it was usable for other people who would be working in the same space. So like it was a contribution. uh, and later on, when the person that built it said something like along the lines of, if I knew that company was going to appreciate it or like acknowledge me for that in this way, I would have. I will always work on building much cooler stuff than this, is what he said, and that reminded me why communities kind of matter a lot. And back when doing Software Freedom Day with NOSC in 2022, 2024 actually, I'm sorry, I realized that you understand things much better when you try to explain them to someone else. We had this stalls of merch of LibreOffice, and there were games and everything. So when you organize a workshop and answer someone's question or like help someone get started, you start noticing the gaps in your own understanding, which can be corrected later. So by the time I was returning as an organizer at UbuCon Asia 2025, I saw this trust between strangers. People from around 11 different countries were there, like contributors, organizers, developers, and community members. And I found myself having these conversations with people from projects like OnlyOffice and Nextcloud and many others. And what surprised me uh, was that they never made me feel like I didn't belong in those conversations. Like everyone respected that people were at different stages of their journey, and you could be someone maintaining a project or like someone making their first small contribution, and both were valuable. So participation does not require complete understanding, like partial understanding also works, and you don't have to try to start by writing a major feature or like becoming an expert in everything, then try to start. Like you can start small. Maybe it could be creating a GTK theme or like wallpaper contributions or like improving a translation or like fixing a small typo in documentation or like raising minor PRs on repositories like anti-gravity's awesome skills is a repository I recently saw, or like just simply answering a question or like just sharing something you've learned, because small contributions are still contributions. And I actually wanted to be a part of spaces like this earlier, but sometimes timing and circumstances don't work out. What matters is that communities keep growing, and seeing people like me from Nepal here today reminds me how far we've come. And I started with a sticker that I thought was cool. You can start with whatever you have, and you can start by documenting what works, what doesn't work, and trust that the community will meet you where you are. Thank you.